Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Why is the Gupkar Alliance so strenuously opposed to non-locals who are ordinarily resident in Jammu and Kashmir being included in the electoral rolls? That's the key issue I shall raise today with the former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir and the working president of the National Conference Party, Omar Abdullah. Omar Abdullah, let's start with that simple, direct question. Why is the Gupkar Alliance so strenuously opposed to non-locals who are ordinarily resident in Jammu and Kashmir being included in the electoral rolls when that is in fact mandated by the Representation of the People Act?
Well, I think, it stems from the fact that prior to 5th August 2019, the only people who voted in J&K were bona fide state subjects. Subsequently, that was changed and you brought in the domicile law. Now, our basic premise is that there is a huge question mark over everything that was done on the 5th of August 2019. The matter is before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is yet to begin hearings on this. It was precisely the same objection that we had with the Delimitation Commission, that you're making all these far-reaching changes without having got the nod from the Supreme Court. Now, I know the Supreme Court has said that they will hear this matter and they have the power to turn back time. But, there is a limit to how much they can turn back. And if these sort of far-reaching changes go ahead, and subsequently the Supreme Court finds that what happened on the 5th of August 2019 was wrong, how do you reverse it? So that's why we are saying that, look, this is not correct. And I understand that this is what applies in the rest of the country. But then the rest of the country does not have a matter that is the purview of the Supreme Court of India right now, does it?
I understand what you're saying completely, but let me put to you the problem. The actual issue, as far as you're concerned, is not the inclusion of non-locals who are ordinarily resident in the electoral rolls. The actual issue for you is the reading down of 370, which you moved the Supreme Court over, but which the Supreme Court refuses to take up. In the meantime, let me finish.
What I was saying is this: all this stems from that, the Delimitation Commission, inclusion, and it's not just that. How do you define an ordinary resident? Tomorrow, Karan, just before elections, you can fly in, take a room in the Taj, and then what? Will you claim ordinary residency and vote?
Well, no, actually, you can't quite do it as easily as that. An ordinary resident person has to prove that he's there. He can't literally fly in and vote the next morning.
There has been no such clarification issued. They've said that 25 lakh new voters will be added. Now, where are these 25 lakhs? Because I don't see 25 lakh non-locals ordinarily resident in J&K right now.
Let me reply to 3-4 things that you've raised, and then I'll go back to the original question I was half asking. First of all, an ordinarily resident person has to prove that he or she is ordinarily resident. You need to show some proof of having lived there for a while. You can't just fly in. Secondly, that person has to also delete any earlier electoral registration he has in some other state. And when it comes to that 25 lakh figure, the state administration itself 24 hours later said it was a misrepresentation of facts. In fact, One more point and then you answer. Nityanand Rai, the Minister of State for Home, said in the Lok Sabha just 4 months ago on the 31st of March this year that only 34 non-local people have bought land in Jammu and Kashmir after August 2019. If you go by that, there's no great flood of people wanting to come and vote, claiming to be resident when they're not. That fear, that suspicion, surely isn't justified by the facts.
Now, if only you were the spokesperson for the Election Commission of India, all this all this would just die away. Now, why is it that the Election Commission of India is unable to say what you're saying? I'm sorry, but I mean, as eloquent as you are, your point of view or your answers, you don't speak for the Election Commission. You don't speak for the J&K. Well, the J&K administration doesn't speak for the Election Commission. The clarification that you saw was issued by the Information Department of the government of Jammu and Kashmir. How is it their business? This figure of 25 lakhs was put in the public domain by the state's chief election officer. The state's chief election officer represents the Election Commission of India. This wasn't a 25 lakh figure that I or any of the other constituent parties of the PAGD imagined. It was put in the public domain in the course of a media briefing by the state chief election officer. If this figure is wrong, why did he not clarify it? Why has the Election Commission of India not clarified it? There is a lot of doubt as to the status of the security forces. Will the security forces be able to vote or not? Will they transfer their vote? I know that ordinarily you have to cancel your vote where you are resident and apply or register where you wish to vote. What is the procedure, the via media, for verifying that vote has been cancelled? All these are doubts, but I come back to that fundamental point. It is the Election Commission that has to satisfy people's complaints or their doubts, and that's not happening.
Can I come in and put this to you? There's no doubt that this matter has been poorly, if not incompetently, handled by the Election Commission. There's no doubt that it was the Election Commission official that, in fact, created confusion by talking about 25 lakhs. And there's no doubt that the clarification when it came from the state government, not the Election Commission. All of this has created suspicion in your mind. But the problem about that suspicion is this. You now have convinced yourself that there's a flood of waiting non-locals who are ready to take over the union territory, outnumber the locals, and therefore create confusion when it comes to the election results because their very presence will sway it in a different direction. But beyond your suspicion, and that's all it is, you have no other basis for fear. It's just suspicion.
Well, the problem is, Karan, when you've been lied to so many times, and when previous suspicions denied by the government turned into facts, there is very little cause for optimism or cause for trust or faith. And I've said this in earlier interviews as well. This is the problem when you misuse institutions to lie to people. Now, in the run-up to what happened on the 5th of August 2019, please look at the kind of institutions that were brought forward in front of people and then asked to utter lies. You had the cancellation of the Yatra, the Amarnath Yatra, saying what? That there has been a weapon and some explosives found on the track, and that is why there is a risk to Yatris, and therefore they must all pack up and go. None of it was true. This was all because you were going to dismember 370. No lesser person than the then occupant of Raj Bhavan, the highest constitutional authority in Jammu and Kashmir, came on television and told the people of Jammu and Kashmir that all this rumor mongering is wrong. The people of Jammu and Kashmir have nothing to fear. There is going to be no change to the status of Jammu and Kashmir, and please go about your lives normally. What happened on the 5th of August 2019? So please, I appreciate that where you're coming from. But again, I will make the point. Unfortunately, you do not speak for the J&K administration, the Union administration, or the Election Commission of India. And none of them enjoy much credibility in the eyes of the people today.
I can understand that because you have been lied to, and I'm using your word, because you have been lied to so often, You've lost faith in institutions that now speak to you. So not only is there confusion with different institutions saying different things and contradicting each other, but there's also this backdrop of lying. But let me come to 4 problems that emerge from the stand that the Gupkar Alliance has taken, that non-locals who are ordinarily resident in Jammu and Kashmir should not be included in the electoral rolls. That is precisely the terms of the 1957 Jammu and Kashmir Representation of the People Act. But after 5th August 2019, it no longer applies. But when you insist that non-locals should not be included, you're actually in effect asking for part of that 1957 Act to still apply. Surely that just can't happen.
No, of course it can happen. When everything that happened on the 5th of August 2019 is the subject matter of the Supreme Court, they are yet to pronounce judgment on it. Of course we can take that line. Why can't we?
Well, no, just a moment. The Supreme Court hasn't passed judgment, but it hasn't struck down what happened in 2019. Therefore, what steps were taken in 2019 and their consequences apply. They are the law of the land until the Supreme Court strikes it down. But what you're saying,
that is what we are questioning. That is what we are questioning. That is precisely what we said with regard to the Delimitation Commission.
But the problem is that as long as the Supreme Court doesn't strike down 5th August 2019, what the government is doing is as per the law of the land, and your request to use part of the Jammu and Kashmir 1957 Act to exclude non-locals simply isn't tenable as far as the law stands today. You want something that is impossible to happen.
No, why is it impossible to happen? Why is it impossible to happen? Why? The Supreme Court is within its power to say that, yes, this is a far-reaching change, and it can be kept in abeyance until such time as we have pronounced judgment on the wider issue. That is within the powers of the Supreme Court. Now, they may or may not do it. I'd be amazed if they did anything like that. But that doesn't stop us from asking.
In other words, you want an interim ruling from the Supreme Court staying the inclusion of non-locals in the electoral rolls until the bigger, wider issue of
we want that these sort of far-reaching changes that have massive implications for Jammu and Kashmir, we want that be put on hold until such time as the Supreme Court finds either in favor or against the petitions that have been placed. Look, none of us are saying that we're not going to accept the judgment of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will judge and the Supreme Court will decide, and that's it. But we want that the Supreme Court starts hearings, pronounces judgment, and puts an end to all this.
Sadly, the Supreme Court shows no sense of hurry whatsoever, but we'll come to the matter in a moment's time, because I know that your father, the chairman of the Gupkar Alliance, has said that you may well take up this issue directly with the Supreme Court. I'll come to that in a moment's time. Let me go back to the second of the 4 problems I said I wanted to raise with you. First of all, and this is the problem, residents of Jammu and Kashmir can be on the electoral rolls of the rest of the country and often are. Mufti Muhammad Said was a voter in 1989 from Muzaffarnagar. Ghulam Nabi Azad was a voter twice from Maharashtra in 1980 and 1985. So if Kashmiris can vote in the rest of India, why can't Indians who are resident in Jammu and Kashmir vote there?
At the risk of repeating myself, this again stems from the changes that were forced on the people of Jammu and Kashmir on the 5th of August 2019. Prior to the 5th of August 2019, these ordinary residents were not allowed to vote. And again, I don't wish to labor the point, but the fact is that we are saying, and this is exactly my point, that these sort of far-reaching changes need to be brought in after the Supreme Court has found once and for all whether what was done was constitutional and legal or not.
But isn't there an inequity, if that's the right word, between the fact that people of Jammu and Kashmir can be on the electoral rolls of the rest of India, but people from the rest of India, even if they are ordinarily resident in Jammu and Kashmir, you don't want them on the electoral rolls?
Well, now you're arguing a fundamental point as to whether 370 was right or not. Whether it was right or not is irrelevant. It is what was committed by the Union of India to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Now we can argue till the cows come home. You can agree one point of view, I can agree another. But that was the constitutional status that Jammu and Kashmir enjoyed. And again, there are other parts of the country, Sikkim, for example, where it is not possible to register so easily to vote as they're making it in Jammu and Kashmir.
So you would like some of the obstacles that exist in Sikkim for registration to vote to apply here as well? That
I'm saying that if you can, I'm saying
that
if you can create special dispensations under Article 371, A, B, C, D, E, etc., for states in the Northeast, Jammu and Kashmir already had it. And again, I'm not asking you to create a special dispensation now. All I'm saying is that these far-reaching changes need to be looked at very seriously in light of the fact that the Supreme Court is yet to pass judgment on what happened.
Let me raise a third problem, and this time it's something that perhaps the audience are not aware of because it is part of the intricacies and complications of the Jammu and Kashmir constitution, which doesn't exist any longer, sadly. Under the now inoperative 1957 Jammu and Kashmir Representation of the People Act, non-locals who are ordinarily resident in Jammu and Kashmir could vote in parliamentary elections. It was only state elections, as they were then called, they couldn't vote in. Now, I'm saying to you, why is it such a big thing if that is extended to today cover union territory elections? They were permitted to vote in parliamentary elections. If you now extend it to the union territory election as well, why is it such a big thing?
You know, the problem, Karan, is that every one of your questions has exactly the same answer. These problems are the result of what happened on the 5th of August 2019. It's as simple as that. And again, like I said, I don't want to labor the point, but the fact is that the Supreme Court is yet to find whether what happened that day was constitutional and legal or not. And our limited point is that you are making far-reaching changes to Jammu and Kashmir, to its demography, that the Supreme Court is yet to certify whether this is correct or not. And we're not saying that this will never happen. We're not saying that ordinary residents will never have the power to vote. We are saying that let the Supreme Court at least find whether what happened was constitutional and legal or not. Then you start making these changes. But the BJP seems to be in a tearing hurry. And again, what was the need for the chief election officer to come and start making all these statements? He is the one who's created all this doubt. This was a non-issue until he popped up and decided to talk about this 25 lakh figure. Again, a 25 lakh figure that nobody has clarified to the satisfaction of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Well, our soldiers, BSF, CRPF, ITBP, SSB, etc., are they going to be treated as ordinary residents in Jammu and Kashmir or not? Just on that 25 lakh figure, the clarification he gave, according to the Indian Express, is this was based on a projection from the census of 2011. However, the same paper has also pointed out that the actual increase between 2011 and 2019 in terms of people to be included in the electoral is only 10 lakh. So there's a lot of confusion, and I accept, and it's been compounded. And again, see, so it's not entirely our fault that this issue has been created. This is an issue, it's a doubt, we want it clarified. Unfortunately, even the clarifications don't work. But let me then bring up a fourth point. This is the fourth of my problems, and you have hinted at it yourself in an earlier answer. It's to do not with Kashmir, but specifically Jammu, which is considered what's called a peace station. Armed forces personnel who are ordinarily resident there because they are posted there would now be entitled to vote if they should want to. Now, these are not people who are being brought in because they're already there. It's not people like non-locals who'll be flooded in to try and change the nature of the voting. They're already present. They're part of the forces guarding the Union territory. Why do you object to them voting? How is it a peace station? Well, does the Armed Forces Special Powers Act not apply to Jammu? It does. If it is a peace station, why has the Armed Forces Special Powers Act not been lifted from Jammu province? Do the soldiers serving there not get a hardship allowance because they're serving in an area that is covered by the Armed Forces Special Powers Act? Do they not receive immunity from prosecution because they're serving in an area that's covered by the Armed Forces Special Powers Act? You can't have your cake and eat it too. On the one hand, you want the hardship allowance, you want immunity from prosecution because you're serving in an area that's covered by the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. You're not subject to any civil law. But when it comes to the vote, then suddenly you're a peace station and you must be allowed to vote. I have no problem if before the elections, the government of India removes the Armed Forces Special Powers Act from the entire Jammu province. By all means, let the soldiers register themselves to vote. Let them come and vote. None of us will raise an objection. But I'm sorry, you can't have, like I said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. On the one hand, you will declare the area a disturbed area under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act will apply to the entire Jammu province. Okay, you will give immunity to soldiers serving there. And then at the same time, you'll say this is a peace station.
Is there a contradiction in the answer you've just given me? You said that if the government to remove the Armed Forces Special Powers Act from Jammu, you would have no problem with soldiers who are resident there voting, but they would still be non-locals. They would still be non-locals. Therefore,
well, that goes to the other argument. That still applies. That still applies about the non-local part of it. But the fact is that the soldiers, I mean, this is a genuine doubt that we have. Soldiers and their families, what happens to them?
But it's a genuine doubt that you don't have a clear answer to, if I've understood you correctly.
No, absolutely not. Look, at the risk of repeating myself, non-locals are being included in this voter list because of what was done on the 5th of August 2019. What was done on 5th August 2019 is under the scrutiny, supposedly, it's to begin yet, of the Supreme Court of India. Our simple point is that until the Supreme Court finds either against or in favor of these petitions, this move has to be kept on hold. It's as simple as that. The rest is all sort of additional detail thrown in, Armed Forces Special Powers Act or not, etc., etc. We have made no distinction. Non-locals are only being included because of the changes. Those changes are yet to be ratified by the Supreme Court, and therefore those changes, with far-reaching consequences, should not be applied. That's it.
We're coming to the end of this interview. Let me, for the sake of the audience, point out what the Tribune has revealed, and I assume the Tribune is correct when it did so on the 18th of August. It claims that there are 17.35 lakh non-locals who have acquired domicile rights after the change in regulations in 2019 on the basis of a 15-year stay in Jammu and Kashmir. 17.35 lakhs according to the Tribune. That, the Tribune calculates, is 14% of Jammu and Kashmir's 13 million population. So it is prima facie a fairly large population that could distinctly change the nature of the voting depending upon where they are geographically located. Now, a lot of what you've said depends on your going to the Supreme Court and getting a favorable hearing from them. This is why I mentioned this number. Will you raise this with the Supreme Court and say this is not simply an issue of principle, it's not simply a matter of Article 370 and you're failing to rule on it? There is a very sizable 17.35 lakh that could be technically included, which would have a dramatic impact on the way the vote goes. Will you raise this point with the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. Yes, we will raise this issue. This issue, I believe, is one that the Supreme Court needs to be made aware of. And what they do with it is another matter altogether. But I think it's something that needs to be seized of because, again, I make this point. The Supreme Court was very clear that they have the power to turn back the clock. Our limited point is that if the changes of such far-reaching nature are allowed to go ahead, there will be a point in time where the Supreme Court will just throw up its hands and say, look, we can't do anything about this any longer. Too much water has flown in the Jhelum.
I understand. But the problem is this, how can you get the Supreme Court to take up the matter? They haven't bothered for 3 years. They've shown no indication of wanting to hear it in a hurry. There's no date that's been set. There's no instance where they've even suggested they look at it in the next 6 months or 1 year. So how do you get them to look at it expeditiously now?
Therein lies the problem. Therein lies one of the root causes of people's erosion of faith in institutions. And perhaps the Supreme Court will take note of that and try and do something to correct it. Failing that, as I told my colleagues in a meeting today, what we have to ensure we do is to make sure that as many original residents of Jammu and Kashmir as possible register to vote, and then on polling day come out and vote, so that if there is any attempt to try and flood some constituencies with so-called ordinary residents, they're rendered an insignificant number in the overall number of people who are voting.
But you're also suggesting, although you haven't said it, that if the Supreme Court doesn't take up this issue expeditiously, the lack of faith in institutions, and perhaps the Supreme Court in particular, will increase that lack of faith that is already...
I don't need to say it in guarded terms. I'll say it openly. The Supreme Court doesn't do itself any favors when the Chief Justice, the soon-to-retire Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India, prior to the summer break, said that as soon as the summer vacation is over, he will constitute the bench that is required to start hearings on this matter of 5th August 2019. The summer break ended a long time ago. He's a few days away from retirement. He's been making really nice, eloquent speeches that sort of gladden one's heart, but putting action to follow on from the words that he's uttered, unfortunately, we don't see much of that. So yes, there is a crisis of credibility. I mean, if the Supreme Court Chief Justice said he'll constitute a bench after the summer break is over, we're waiting for that bench.
But it's not just a crisis of credibility vis-a-vis the Supreme Court. It's actually a crisis of credibility vis-a-vis sentiment in Kashmir and the rest of the country.
Well, it's not just sentiment in Kashmir. If you had been present in that all-party meeting, you would have heard leaders from Jammu. I sincerely believe that this issue actually agitates voters in Jammu more than it agitates voters in Kashmir, because of these people that you talked about who've taken domicile, 17 whatever lakh. I dare say that the overwhelming majority of them will have been in Jammu province as opposed to Kashmir province. So if at this point in time, if there is a voter who is going to be marginalized, it is perhaps the original voter of Jammu, less than the original voter of Kashmir.
So this has opened a fissure, a real divide between Jammu and Kashmir on the one hand and the rest of the country.
Well, it's an issue that has agitated people. It's created a lot of doubt. It's created a lot of suspicion. I don't want to use words like fissure, etc., because then they get open to interpretation and get misinterpreted in speeches in Parliament. So no, I'm not going to use a word like that, but I am going to say that it has agitated people. It has concerned people. They are worried about sort of being disempowered in their own homes, and it's something that they'd like to see a solution to.
My last question. Your father, Farooq Abdullah, who's the chairman of the Gupkar Alliance, has publicly said that this is an issue that he intends to raise possibly as early September with other national parties and other regional parties. What makes you think that they will agree that an act that applies to the rest of the country should not apply to Jammu and Kashmir? What makes you think they'll accept that Jammu and Kashmir should be an exception?
I don't think they will. But that shouldn't stop him from talking to them or trying to convince them. I know that we have very few friends outside of Jammu and Kashmir on these issues. And therefore, I don't have great expectations of support from any of them.
And if elections happen without the Supreme Court hearing the bigger 370 issue, and non-locals who are resident are included in the electorals, the only thing you can do is to ensure that the older domiciled residents of Jammu and Kashmir all go and register and all go and vote. That's the only thing you have.
At the end of the day, yes. At the end of the day, if knocking on the Supreme Court's doors, if clarifications from the Election Commission don't address the issue, then yes, really all we have is to make sure that the original residents of Jammu and Kashmir register themselves to vote, come out in large numbers, and ensure that this sort of injecting of temporary residents, so to speak, doesn't influence the outcome of the election. Because we know that these temporary residents will be brought in or will have arrived purely to benefit one party. And it's no secret which party that is.
So from your point of view, this is a despairing situation.
No, I'm not despairing at all. I'm not despairing at all. I believe that we are doing what we are supposed to, which is to agitate the issue, to talk about it, to sort of put our point of view forward. We're not threatening. None of us have said that if this isn't resolved, we won't fight elections or we'll come out on the streets or we'll resort to violence. In fact, what I'm saying is, I mean, at a very fundamental level, the answer to this is actually to participate in elections more rather than stay away from elections. You know, for 30 years, Kashmir has seen a culture of boycotting elections. Perhaps the solution to what the center is trying to do here is on polling day to not sit at home wrapped in a blanket watching television, but to come out and vote in such large numbers that this attempt to change the voter patterns in Jammu and Kashmir is rendered useless.
Omar Abdullah, thank you very much for talking to me.
Pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.